Alrighty, well it's 2 after, so I think we'll go ahead and get started with the webinar today. I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of your day to attend the webinar. Hopefully you'll learn some interesting information that you can take back to your community or wherever it is that you work and apply the useful information we hope to share. Just some logistical information. Um, the chat box there on the right side of your screen, you're welcome to use that at any point during the webinar to ask a question. And probably towards the end of the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session and be able to get to a few of those questions. The webinar is being recorded, so if you are not able to stay for the whole thing, we will be able to have it for distribution on the Broadband Illinois website. With that, I'd like to also promote our next webinar in this series. On Wednesday, October 9th, we will have a webinar called the Chicago Southland Project and Other Illinois Fiber Projects. It will highlight public and private broadband networks in Illinois. Illinois is home to a lot of broadband infrastructure, and we're excited to share a couple best practices on this Wednesday, October 9th webinar. Again, if you go to our website, you can find information on how to register for that. With that, I want to thank the speakers who are on this webinar today, and thank Broadband Communities for partnering on this process, on this webinar. It's great that a national publication like Broadband Communities has recognized all the work that Illinois has in terms of broadband and have decided to bring their conference to Tinley Park in November. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff Ryman, who is the president of Broadband Communities. Jeff, you are unmuted.
Great, thanks. Can I be heard okay?
I can hear you fine. Let me just ask quickly if you can hear Jeff, could you raise your hand using the panel on the right?
All right.
All right, I see a lot of hands up in the air, so it seems as though you were working okay, Jeff.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, I am Jeff Ryman, president of Broadband Communities. Thank you for joining us for what I will call the unofficial launch of the Fiber, Broadband, and Economic Development Conference, which is being held in the Chicago Southland at the Tinley Park Convention Center this November 5th through 7th. Thank you again to Clayton and our conference co-host, Partnership for Connecting Illinois, and helping to organize this two-part pre-conference webinar series. We could not be more pleased with the program that will be discussed on today's webinar and what will then go into further depth at the conference, which is analyzing successful fiber-based broadband strategies that drive economic development. Because as markets continue to respond better than most could have predicted, municipalities throughout the Midwest, around the country, are taking proactive steps to incorporate sustainable economic development initiatives. And while those strategies and specific goals may differ, the underlying commonality is the increased recognition that access to robust fiber broadband infrastructure is the first critical step in ensuring a community, municipality, and region is positioned for growth. But how is that done successfully? What are the different strategies and options? Should a municipality deploy their own community fiber network? Should they partner with a local provider? What are the options that are available? And in an industry that is full of regulatory and technical complexity that is often far beyond the traditional focus, expertise of political and community leaders, and with unfortunately a number of examples of failed or stalled initiatives, it's important to highlight that successful community fiber broadband networks can be accomplished and that numerous examples of success do exist. But to be clear, this is not necessarily a simple exercise. In fact, candidly, this industry often presents greater opportunity for failure than it does for success, which speaks to the relevance of this webinar and for the upcoming conference. Because when it is understood how to be done properly, municipalities that move forward on a plan that is committed to broadband excellence are positioning themselves to reap the economic and social benefits that are then unlocked and enabled. And so with that, I would like to introduce today's webinar leaders, who of course will also be presenting at the conference. They will be expanding on the content and will of course be available on site for Q&A. Again, time permitting, we will have a Q&A session at the conclusion of this webinar, but we do hope that this presentation helps to generate discussions that again will be expanded upon at the conference. I'll also note that the lowest registration rates for the conference do expire this week on Friday, so if interested, attending please do register this week and take advantage of those lowest registration rates. Today's panelists leading the discussion will be Jim Ballard. He is our conference chairman, distinguished attorney out of Washington, D.C., and expert in community broadband deployments. We're pleased to also be joined by David Sandell, president of Sandell and Associates and industry expert. David's out of St. Louis, Missouri. And Lori Sorensen, the chief operating officer for the Illinois Department of Central Management Services, Bureau of Communications and Computer Services. And of course, Chris Mitchell, who's the director of the Telecommunications as Commons Initiative with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Chris is out of Minneapolis. With that, Jim, I'll hand to you the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you both to Broadband Illinois and to Broadband Communities for the opportunity to organize and chair the conference to be held in Tinley Park. Let me ask a question here. For me to advance the slides, what do I need to do for that?
Jim, I will I will give you control here now so that you can actually. Actually, it'd probably be easiest if you just go ahead and say next slide, and I'll
just ask you to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just go to the next slide then. Thank you. Okay, so let me give you an overview of the overview. What I'm going to do is to give you a bird's eye view of what the conference is going to be like, and then Dave and Lori and Chris will drill into some of the program in greater detail. What distinguishes our conference from other conferences in the broadband or fiber or community area is that we are focusing on the single most important driver of community broadband or broadband of regional or local nature, and that's economic development. Every one of our speakers on every panel, every session, every keynoter is going to drill into the implications of broadband, particularly high capacity broadband, on economic development. Everyone is in favor of economic development regardless of political affiliation or other kinds of issues that divide us. We all want to do economic development better, and that is a complex multidisciplinary challenge, and so we are looking at that issue, the relationship between broadband economic development and job creation, from multiple angles throughout the session. We're going to have several workshops on the first day of our event on the 5th of November, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a few moments. We're going to start out with our featured community, the Chicago Southland Fiber Network, which is the host of our event. We're going to have a keynote by Illinois Governor Pat Quinn. We're going to then have a few blue ribbon panels, and then we've got a number of outstanding sessions for you. Next slide, please. We have lined up 6 workshops. There will be 2 at a time. It will be difficult for you to choose among them, but they're going to be great workshops. Steve Ross, one of the editors of Broadband Communities, will be running a workshop on financing networks, strategies and options, particularly those that advance economic development. We'll have a session on innovations in telemedicine, precision agriculture. That will be Gary Evans and some folks from John Deere talking about how agriculture is becoming an important market for broadband, and that broadband is also making precision agriculture much more doable and successful. Michael Curry will take charge of adoption with his program looking at the tools that his company SNG has developed to enable communities to target what will work, what won't work as well in broadband adoption, that will also allow communities to benchmark themselves against comparable communities. We will have an interesting session led by Don Samuelson on getting seniors online and making the most of them, and giving them the opportunity to make the most of their lives economically and otherwise. And Jane Patterson will lead a session on the new education initiatives and how those can be integrated into economic development. Next slide, please. Our featured community, as I said, was the Chicago Southland Fiber Project. They are developing a new 144 strand trunk from downtown Chicago down the I-57 corridor, and along that corridor there will be dozens of anchor institutions served in the first phase, including education, medical institutions, and others. And at the same time, there are plans for community networks to branch off that trunk line, revitalizing a whole region of Illinois that had been in decline up until recently. It's a fascinating story, and Rusty Winchell will lead that, and he's pulled together several of the individuals involved in that project. Next slide, please. Governor Pat Quinn has gotten broadband and economic development for a very long time. I've known him since he was a lieutenant governor, and he at the time didn't have the authority to develop his ideas and put them into effect, but boy, has he taken charge of that issue now that he has become governor of Illinois. Broadband communities will be awarding him for his accomplishments, and he'll be giving us one of our keynotes as well. So we'll be us for this event. Next slide, please. We'll have one or two blue ribbon panels depending on whether a person that we're hoping to provide a second keynote joins us. We've got many leaders on a national level, such as Lev Gonick and Mark Ansbury, Blair Levin, and several others on our program with us. And as a second, one of our blue ribbon panels will be the session on Kansas City, how the city is taking advantage of Google Fiber. You'll hear more about that today from Dave Sandel, and you'll see a lot more of that in Chicago. Next slide, please. And then we come to our outstanding sessions, and we have two tracks of these outstanding sessions. And as I said, we're going to take economic development apart and examine it from many different angles, like a cubist painting, and put it back together again, and hope that the reward for the audience will be to take away knowledge and information that they can use right away. We'll look at how in the startup phase of a project, economic development and job creation can be used as an organizing tool, as a way to explain to people what you're doing and why you're doing it, to build alliances, to make project as inclusive as possible. We will look at projects that are already started and look at how an emphasis on economic development can help make those projects more sustainable. Chris is going to be leading a panel on local success story, and Laurie Sorensen has put together 2 panels, one focusing on state and the other focusing on regional success stories, and you'll hear more later from Laurie and Chris. By the numbers, we want to know, all of us want to know, what do the numbers say? What impact can we track? What do we know about the impact of fiber and other broadband technologies on job creation? What kinds of benefits are measurable? What kinds of benefits are not exactly measurable but out there? We want as much detail as we can get, and our panel on By the Numbers will help us get a good sense of the impact of broadband on economic development, job creation, and other important benefits. Next, we will focus on how to use service to community anchor institutions, small businesses, education and workforce development, working with economic development agencies. We'll look at all of those issues, and we've got great speakers who are deeply involved in each of those areas. And we have the leaders of US Ignite program that has been working with the National Science Foundation and the White House to develop a variety of applications that will both take advantage of and drive the high capacity broadband networks of the future, and we'll get a glimpse of how those programs will be driving economic development in our communities, probably a lot sooner than you think. So with that, let me turn the mic over to our next speaker, and if you have questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them later.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to Broadband Communities for letting me speak today. Just want to double check that you can hear me okay out there.
You sound good, Jim. David, sorry, I can hear you.
Okay, and so you'll be advancing the slides, I guess?
Yeah, just I will flip it to your slide now, and just let me know when you want me to flip to the next slide.
Okay, I will be in Chicago November 7th, and we'll be updating on the Kansas City initiative, speaking more specifically about the economic impact of one of the high-profile gigabit initiatives in the United States. And we're going to be doing an update session around economic development impact and how to recover revenues from the economic development impact. Next slide, please. Panels that will be available will also be Mike Burke, who is the co-chair of the Mayor's Bi-State Innovation Team, Rick Usher, who is the Assistant City Manager with Kansas City, Missouri, Aaron Deacon, the Managing Director of KC Digital Drive, and Steve Fennell, who is the Director for Telecom Outreach at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Next slide, please. And could you also hit the key one more time so it shows the entire slide? Thank you. So a couple reflections from the road, which are very important to understanding the economic development impact. First one is that high impact gigabit communities are 90% sociology and 10% infrastructure. This is a quite different view of this since we've come through the dot-com boom in the late 90s, in which all focus was put on technology and deriving revenue streams from the technology itself or connection fees. Now we see that the impact across the metropolitan economy is so high that it's actually the sociological impact that will drive the revenue streams. The second item is that we also see that economic development impact is a choice and not a guarantee. And what that really means is you can let the general market respond and do its thing and create economic impact. But gigabit communities which thoughtfully align organizations and resources will definitely have a higher degree of economic output. So with that in mind, it's just not about the sociological and educational impact. It's that the sociological impact drives revenue streams. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're also going to cover in Kansas City is how to observe revenue generation across the economy and how to begin to recover it. So, for example, what we did was, as you know, it's very important to sustain your network and to sustain the planning organization. So we decided to develop a tool, which I've loosely called here a gigabit revenue impact statement, more commonly known as an economic development impact statement, to start to quantify the revenue impact to a gigabit initiative. And we started doing this in St. Louis with the Loop Media Hub initiative because it's very small and easy to get your hands around. But we're also going to apply it to the much broader impact that's taking place in Kansas City. So what we did in this discovery of this gigabit revenue impact statement is, this is not a cookie cutter approach. It's actually a small research project. This actual version is a 5-page document. And in the document, we started by reviewing the present real estate status, its current valuation within the project corridor. Then we also reviewed present demographics and estimated spending that comes out of published tables by the federal and county government as to what's happening within the project area. We also reviewed the census population number within various areas around the project area, and population and occupation classification within those same radiuses around the project area. With that information in hand, we then did an economic assessment of the project area, looking in detail as to what was going to take place and how it might affect current economic activity. And then we developed from that a projected economic impact, which you see part of on this slide. And we calculated this information using the IMPLAN economic model. And IMPLAN is an impact analysis planning tool, which makes use of information that's published by the federal government, the state government, and the county government. But the tool allows you to extrapolate the information on a regional or local basis. So in our analysis here, you can see a reasonable estimate and a stretch estimate for a very small gigabit community that's just 2 linear miles long and just doesn't stretch outside of that main street very much. We actually call it a gigabit main street. It includes a reasonable estimate and a stretch estimate. And we looked at these numbers and we're very pleased with them, and they seem to fit in line with the wide variety of initiatives taking place. But we began to scratch our heads a little bit and said, well, how do we know if we're going to have the reasonable estimate or the stretch estimate? What is it about our initiative which will help us to attain the stretch estimate? So we came up with some conclusions. And next slide, please. And if you could, yes, bring them all the way down. Fantastic. What we realized that there's actually 3 different types of economic impact. The first one we call incremental impact. And what that means is if a city or a community initiative does nothing but build a network and has no additional activity beyond what is in the local commercial market, they have what we call incremental impact, which means that if City A does exactly the same thing as City B and builds the same network and there's no planning beyond that, there will be no additional activity or no distinguishable economic impact. They will both have the same impact because they're both enjoying the same applications and services and no other planning mechanism. So then we also considered, well, what is the economic impact? And economic impact or economic development is really a term which has been defined over the last 100 years related to traditional economic analysis and planning techniques to accelerate outputs from silo-oriented projects, big ticket projects such as bridges or business parks or real estate developments. And those things make use of existing organizational structures which are also hierarchical. So that led us to realize that if we're going to stretch and get the entire impact and begin to capture it, we needed to create a new category called gigonomic impact or gigonomics. And what this is where we actually have a separate planning organization and we invite the economic development organizations and other parties to the table. And we use a holistic oriented planning and leadership mechanism to actually extract and develop a greater trans-sector economic development impact across the entire region. And that's what you see that was in that previous number of the stretch estimate. And this has worked very, very well in St. Louis. And since St. Louis in many ways is patterned after Kansas City, we expect to see similar types of results, but with different numbers. And when we present in Chicago, we will talk about how to generate these revenues. And even more important is if a gigabit initiative generates these revenues, how do we capture them? And there are a variety of different techniques that allow us to capture those revenues and return them to the initiative for reinvestment or to support the sustainability of the planning organization. So these are very, very powerful techniques, and these numbers help greatly to support investment, but they can go much further. For example, if we were to apply this type of methodology and planning technique to the entire state of Illinois, we could develop gigabit revenue impact statements for many communities across the state of Illinois. We could then recover revenues from each individual community to support and reinvest in those communities, and then have a small amount of revenue left over to support a regional or statewide initiative. So that's part of what we'll be talking about in Chicago in November, how we see this happening in Kansas City, also applying it possibly to the state of Illinois. And if you're not there, you're not going to learn about it. So you got to make sure to come November 4th. Look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
All righty, thank you, David. With that, I believe I unmuted the next speaker, who is Lori Sorensen, the Chief Operating Officer for the Illinois Century Network and Illinois Central Management Services. Lori, are you able to speak?
Yes. Can you hear me, Clayton?
Yep, I hear you loud and clear. Sound good?
Great. Well, great. As Jim mentioned, I've been working on two panels, one that looks at successful state collaborations and another that looks at regional collaborations. So for the state collaborations, we have 5 terrific speakers that represent several different Midwest states. Clayton, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. These folks are broadband leaders in their states, or in some ways I think you could describe them as evangelists. We have Brian Croak, Chief of Staff for the Office of Governor Pat Quinn from Illinois. We have Charlotte Narges, Special Projects Manager in the state of Nebraska. We have David Porter, is Director of Mo Broadband Now in Missouri. Don Welch, President and CEO of Merit Network in Michigan, and Mike Waldner, State Broadband Capacity Manager for the state of South Dakota. And these 5 individuals will be sharing the different approach that they are taking, or approaches sometimes that they're taking within their states, and helping you to understand why they are approaching it from that angle versus public-private partnerships, collaborations, broadband adoptions. And I think what we find is, while each state is very unique, as alluded to earlier, given regulatory environment, the political environment, the challenges on broadband are very complex. So each state is trying to find a formula that works well given their environment. And so while it's a little bit different, one of the common themes that I think you'll hear from these panelists is, first of all, at a state level, recognition that broadband is essential to nearly every industry and service that government provides. That includes healthcare, education, public safety, agriculture, and economic development. And with this recognition that broadband is that key ingredient to success across all of those industries and services, states are recognizing the need that they must be active leaders in working with the public and private sectors to address expanding broadband access, improving speeds, addressing costs, and working on providing training and support to those populations that have a low adoption rate with broadband. The other thing I think you'll hear from these panelists is when you talk about economic development, and depending on which state or which leader, and sometimes even within the same state, the definition and the success of economic development varies. In states you're working with, especially you look at Illinois, very diverse. We have the very large urban area, Chicago and the Chicago metropolitan area, and then very small rural communities. And what is economic success differs in a large metropolitan area. It's attracting jobs. It's, as Dave talked about a little bit with the real estate impact and other industries and spend. But yet you talk about in these other communities and economic success is sometimes retaining jobs, or actually I should say retaining citizens, residents, their population, being able to keep their schools open. For some, it's having a doctor's office or a clinic within a county. And so that definition of success varies, and that's something, a challenge, I think, for these state leaders to make sure that they spread their focus across all those varying needs. Some of the successes, so each one of them will kind of share what they feel has, they're most proud of, some accomplishments and successes, how they got there, why there is a success, and maybe offer some ideas on how one might go about implementing something similar back in their community. In Illinois, Ryan will talk about grants that the state has developed and put in place to fund both public and private investments in broadband expansion. Talking about activities trying to remove barriers, something we've heard a lot is the challenges that private and public sector has in expanding broadband that drives time delays, cost delays, and different approaches to solving those challenges. And then also talking about regional planning, breaking down your state into smaller geographic areas and engaging the business sector, the providers, your economic development folks, both at a state level and a local level, your anchor institutions, and bringing those folks together to develop unique plans and challenges for their communities. Also trying to understand the assets that a community has and how best to go forth and market and promote those. Something that David talked about is his quote he shared, economic development impact is a choice, not a guarantee. And I think that's something you'll hear from some of these speakers. It's about recognizing what you have as you put the efforts to build and expand and address these broadband challenges. Then it's this whole other activity of recognizing what you have and taking positive and proactive measures to promote that and build industry around those assets. In Nebraska, Charlotte is going to talk with you how they work with very much with the private sector in addressing broadband needs, working with, and the state comes in and works with the business sector to understand broadband needs, develop some planning, and working with that private sector to help have a more organized and direct approach to the broadband expansion. Nebraska also has, I believe, one of the few states that has its own state universal service fund, where they collect money and use that to make investments in broadband with the private sector. And again, taking that information that they've gathered from the business community and understanding where their needs are for future growth, and where working with the service providers to understanding where the infrastructure is lacking, and then using that money to make those investments where it will have the most impact. Missouri, you'll hear from Damon Porter talking. In Missouri, a lot of focus on telemedicine, the broadband needs for telemedicine, and how to grow that industry, not only from an economic development impact, but also, of course, from a state perspective, the need for quality health care, addressing access and affordability, and how telemedicine and broadband can help solve those challenges. And not only looking at broadband, but the other digital services that come with it, cloud services such as storage, and taking a statewide active leadership approach in helping meet those needs. Then in Michigan, you'll hear from Don Welch, and really talking about their approach has really been a public-private partnership, and working together collaboratively to expand infrastructure access, to create that open access network and infrastructure, and work with kind of create multiple providers and competition and options, so that will help improve speeds, kind of drive the innovation and drive up innovation and drive down costs. And then also working with their state leadership in, a challenge that many states are facing, which has to do with the growing broadband needs of the K-12 community, and how, again, the state, can leverage those existing public-private assets and develop kind of a comprehensive plan to improve that access there to K-12, which then, of course, drives that economic development. Schools trying to, communities and their ability to survive and keep their population and their residents is very dependent on having quality schools that provide students with access to advanced education courses and teaching 21st technology skills. And so that K-12 component, I think, is something facing a lot of communities, states. In South Dakota, Mike Waldner, he will be talking a lot how their approach, and he describes they're very rural in South Dakota, and dealing with very small population centers. And so talking about working with the private sector, how they've pulled them in and trying to aggregate the business, the residential, the anchor institution, the government, the broadband needs, and to help generate or drive those investments from the private sector, so that it's kind of, aggregating demand and bringing that to the private sector. Also, he talks a lot, you'll hear from him, that focus, what does economic development mean in a community? And you'll hear from him, success is something completely different than what we may think of. And again, that's retaining that population in the community. That is a success for many of their communities. Going on to the regional collaboration, and Clayton, if you want to go to the list of panelists for regional. There, we're talking about regional collaborations. You'll hear this can be regional, say, within a community, You'll hear regional, a little bit of the speakers that might talk a little about working across borders, across states. And I think you're going to also hear a little bit regional, multiple communities within a state, how to bring these diverse, separate communities together or business sectors together to provide a comprehensive single solution. We have, on this panel, we have three great speakers, and they include Tim Berlesman. He is the CEO of ComNet, and that is based out of Ohio. David Lois, Executive Director of WISNet, based out of Wisconsin. And Mark Schlanta, CEO of SDN Communications, and that is based out of South Dakota. And something you're going to hear across all these panelists is the theme of partnerships. I think they'll all talk to you about a key to success is partnerships, whether it is collaborating with different industries, with different providers, with different geographic areas. And the keys to their successes, I think, that they'll share with their projects and their initiatives has been that reaching out to maybe groups that they have traditionally not worked with and may have at some points been, from a provider perspective, have seen themselves as competitors, and how they're breaking down those barriers and working together for a common solution. In Ohio, ComNet will speak to, that's where it's a partnership of bringing together many small private providers and bringing them together with the residents, the residential broadband providers, and with your state research and education networks, and with your community anchor institutions and that business sector, in sitting down in a geographic area and trying to understand what is the need, what's existing that they can work with, and developing a comprehensive single solution and on how to expand that broadband into those areas to deliver the speeds that are needed to provide a scalable medium that's going to grow and meet the needs long term, and do it in a way that is affordable and sustainable. In Wisconsin, David Lois is going to talk about where WISNet is a state research and education network, and how they are taking the knowledge and the expertise of their network engineers and their business administrators, and working with those small communities that are maybe kind of left behind still from a broadband perspective, and taking a proactive approach and coming in and helping them to develop a plan and a roadmap on how to build a community anchor network, and providing those skill sets. So many of those communities, especially if you're very small, you lack the knowledge and expertise to even go about making on how to develop a plan, let alone implement, let alone sustain. And WISNet is taking the knowledge that they have and going into those communities and helping them and sharing that and helping them get something established and operating and sustaining that, and helping them with sustainability if and where needed. And then in South Dakota, SDN Communications, Mark is going to share with you again that this is an approach where these independent broadband providers have recognized the needs of these needs of the business community, which when they're working with banking and healthcare, these banks and healthcare want to connect their branches and their offices in multiple locations throughout the state, and sometimes it even reaches across the borders. And this industry is looking for, a single solution, a comprehensive solution. And so SDN is providers, many independent providers coming together and working to approach and work with business as a one-stop shop and develop single solutions, though, that go across many provider networks, grow across different geographic areas, and may even go across into different states. They're also working with, this is again a case, as I mentioned before when we were talking on the state panel, where the state very much tries to work with to aggregate the broadband needs of business, residential, anchor institutions, and state, and work with that private sector. And so again, this is that other angle of that puzzle coming from the private provider perspective and how they have developed a model that is successful in meeting those needs, expanding broadband access, getting fiber to the homes, to residents in their homes even, and doing so in a sustainable model. So that's a little overview of the state and the regional. I think what you're going to hear is these panelists are very passionate about what they do. They have, I think, really, invested a lot of time and effort in trying to understand the unique challenges that is facing their region or their state, and they've come up with a successful formula that works with the strengths they have, addresses the challenges, and is something I think that they can share and want to share, and hopefully you'll learn some good ideas, or you'll hear some good ideas that you can take away and maybe repeat in your community, your state.
Alrighty, thank you, Lori, for the presentation. With that, I will turn it over to Chris Mitchell, the third and final speaker. He is the Director of Telecommunications as Commons Initiative at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Chris is on a possibly not great connection, so we'll see if this works. Chris, are you able to speak?
Yes. How is my connection coming through?
You sound clear right now, so maybe we'll be
all right. I'm staying at a hotel that defines not taking good care of business customers, unfortunately, for a conference. But I'm very much looking forward to this upcoming conference. So you can go to the next slide. I'm moderating a panel. I don't know how many people here are familiar with my organization. And if I do start to break up, just interrupt me, moderator, my person. Our organization's been around for 40 years, been operating with solutions for local governments and communities larger than, not just local governments, but also cooperatives and other arrangements. For the last 8 years, we've been focused on telecommunications as one of our 4 or 5 key initiatives to make sure that communities have the connections that they need, to make sure that everyone in the community does. We're talking residents, businesses, schools, the municipal facilities, all kinds of things. And for us, that's mostly involved working on networks that are owned by local governments or cooperatives or some form of nonprofit arrangement. And there's a long rationale for it, but the short version is it's less likely to become consolidated and owned by an absentee company outside of the community, which in our experience tends to operate less for the benefit of the community. So you can go to the next slide. We work on a website called muninetworks.org, and we have a number of examples of economic development and how city-owned networks or cooperatives have benefited the communities in which they operate, and often ways in which they don't really operate the same way as another does. Sorry, you can stick around here, yeah. The economic development slide is a little different than I envisioned it. It's supposed to be really tiny squished, because one of the things that broadband communities has really done well over the years, with this economic development track, is focusing on the ways in which economic development is not a narrow issue. The focus is not just trying to get a big employer to come to town. The focus is how to have a thriving private sector, how to make sure that everyone in the community has jobs. So a little bit was lost in that last slide in translation. I'm sorry. But this current slide shows which states in the Midwest have restrictions on local governments building their own networks. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see that nonetheless, a lot of communities in these states have found a way of building networks that are able to be responsive to the needs. I didn't put the key in. I just wanted to show the different types of arrangements. These represent networks from everything from dark fiber networks to city-owned triple play universal cable networks in which everyone in town can connect, to fiber to the home networks, those are the gold ones, to networks that are just serving a few business anchors. And on our panel that we're going to be talking about some of the communities that have made direct investments in networks to serve different aspects of the community, we're going to represent different slices of each of these. So we're not just going to sort of harp on one model over and over again. We're going to hit different models and draw different lessons and provide ideas across a broad continuum of actions that local governments can take, or lessons from local governments that are going to be applicable to other types of nonprofit arrangements. So we can go to the next slide. We're going to have a number of different communities on the panel. One is the head of the utility for Chanute, Kansas, which is in the southeast corner of Kansas. It's a rural community. This is a report that we had done on Chanute, and we'd worked carefully with this with Larry Gates, the director of the utility, in preparing it. They're very inspirational for a small town. They've just built a rather incredible network that is being expanded, and both they're expanding their own network, but other communities have been inspired to do similar things. And so we're gonna cover some of that. This network at present just connects the schools, libraries, municipal facilities, utility facilities, and then some local businesses. There's both a fiber optic and a wireless component that have been developed over the years in direct response to local business needs. And then they have also been investing in the school and library connections out of a recognition that you can't have a thriving private sector and a thriving job base if you don't have a good school system. And the school system needs to be able to take advantage of technology. So when they brought in they recently had a big employer come to town with several hundred jobs, maybe 200 jobs, and that would not have happened if they didn't have the fiber optic network as a part of the services that they could offer, if they didn't have strong schools. And so these are some of the things we'll be digging into with regard to Chanute. And then the last point is that they did build this network without borrowing for it. And so one of the things that we are going to do is to cover different ways that communities can make these investments without having to engage in massive borrowing, which I think is appropriate. So the next slide, one of our other panels is the UC2B network, the Urbana-Champaign Big Broadband Network. That's where the two Bs come from. These are folks that spend a very long time organizing their network behind the scenes, getting people to understand the value of the network. And then when the broadband stimulus packages, the two programs became available, they won an award to be able to build this. It's mostly middle mile and some last mile connections, which means they're mostly focused on the community anchor institutions, the schools, the libraries, but they're serving businesses along the way. And then there's a few thousand people in low-income neighborhoods that are getting fiber to the home. And so they're offering a 20 megabit package for just $20 a month. So we're going to be learning a number of lessons from them. And one of the things that they're doing today is that it's an open access approach, which means they're trying to have multiple service providers with the goal of giving businesses and residents many options. Which can be a challenging business model, but we'll see what they've learned in the course of our panel. And then you can go to the final slide, but I actually did not prepare a slide for this network, which is the Auburn Essential Services, which is one of the older fiber networks in the country. They've been operating for a long time. It started off as a network to benefit the utility, and then they connected a major business in town to make sure that that business was able to be competitive and keep those jobs locally. And then that ended up expanding to other businesses because other businesses also wanted to take advantage of such an incredible connection. And then eventually it spread out and connects residents now. And so this would be a different approach. And we'll look at the lessons that were learned from Auburn, this Auburn, Indiana. And I think we may still have one other panelist to bring in some other lessons. But you'll find that when I run a panel, I really try to keep us focused on very concrete things and draw out specific lessons. So I hope that we'll be successful in doing that as well. And I'll turn it back over to the moderator.
Alrighty. Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. With that, I'm going to unmute Jeff Ryman, President of Broadband Communities again. All right, Jeff, you're unmuted.
Great, and thank you, everybody. That concludes the webinar. We are right at the hour, so unfortunately we won't have opportunity for Q&A given the time constraint. But again, the purpose of this webinar was to begin the discussion, hopefully begin thinking about the topics that you'd like to expand upon. All of the participants on the webinar will be at the conference. We do hope you're able to join us November 5th through 7th in Chicago, actually technically Tinley Park, at the Tinley Park Convention Center there in the Chicago Southland, provide fresh insight from the rich program of proven industry leaders. What I'm most excited about is that we run the entire spectrum from sourcing the financing, identifying potential financial opportunities, to identifying the technology, to the applications that these networks support that lead to sustainable economic development networks. I do, again, emphasize the lowest registration rates do expire this week, so if interested in attending, please take advantage of that. Those rates do go up following Friday close of business. And with that, we can go to the next slide. The register is there at bbcmag.com/Chicago. Use discount code Chicago Now with the low registration rate of $115, and that does include all the pre-conference workshops which Jim Baller spoke to at the beginning of this webinar. Next slide. Again, the website bbcmag.com/Chicago for more information on the conference. Next slide. And with that, that's the conclusion of the webinar. Thank you so much to all of our partners, Clayton Partnership for Connected Illinois, for our sponsors, Clearfield, Gigabit Squared, G4S, the Smart Chicago Collaborative. We have a great exhibit hall as well, where you'll be able to learn more from the vendors. We really do hope you'll be able to join us November 5th through 7th in Chicago. Thank you.